Up is a tentative map request to subdivide 8.36 acre site into 14 single-family residential lots ranging from 6,660 square feet to 21,890 square feet with 2 common parcels and a dedication of 3.7 acres to the Uvas Creek Park Preserve on property located between the northern end of Greenfield Drive and Uvas Creek. APN 808-20008. The James Group, care of James Sooner, is the applicant. And Christy, staff report, please.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Council. Christy Abrams, Community Development Director. I'm going to just provide a very brief high-level history, and then Craig will be presenting the project to the Council. This project was brought to staff as an application in 2016. Staff worked the most recent application. Craig will go through previous applications with the council. Staff spent a considerable amount of time trying to work with the applicant to get a project that would meet the policies and the goals of the City of Gilroy's general plan, our Uvas Park Preserve, et cetera, and so on. And Craig will go into much more detail on that. We continue to work with the developer. Unfortunately, the developer did have a turnover of staff, and as you, Council, are all aware, we've had quite a bit of turnover within our city. However, we continued to work with the developer throughout this entire process. Last summer, the developer wanted us to take the application forward to Council. Actually, needed to go to Planning Commission and then Council. We still did not come to a consensus. We were still trying to negotiate. We were not being successful. Staff said, sure, we can take it, but we'll take it with a recommendation of denial. The developer still did not want to move forward with a recommendation of denial. So we continued to work. We came to a deadlock as far as the developer was concerned, and so he came to Council and said, Council, have this project go to you for a decision. The process had to go through Planning Commission first. The staff took that project. The project is going to be presented to you slightly different, as you know, there's been some modifications since then. Took that to Planning Commission with a recommendation of denial, and citing several policies of why a denial should be made, and particularly violations of our general plan policies. The Planning Commission did not accept that recommendation of a denial from staff, and they actually recommended that the project be approved by the, moved to the council with a recommendation of approval. We could not move to council with a recommendation of approval because the environmental analysis had not yet been completed. We went through the process, and during that time frame, we did some more discussions with the applicant on trying to come to some kind of compromise. And what you will see before you tonight is a compromise. One of the last things that, a compromise that was made that allowed staff to move into that recommendation of approval was to show building envelopes on lots 1 and 2. Craig will show you those are very heavily wooded lots. The whole idea was to be saving the trees. We just got done talking about a tree preservation ordinance. The other item was to put in these dual retaining walls, and by doing that in the interface between the Uvas Park Preserve, that preserved another significant amount of oak trees that would have had to be removed. So what you see before you tonight is a project that may not be what we feel is the highest and best planning project for this location, but we feel that we have come to a very reasonable compromise with the applicant. The applicant has been very vocal in criticizing staff during this entire process. That criticism has been unwarranted. Staff has continued to try to work with the applicant, even when having verbal abuse. And I really praise our staff as trying to take the high road in working through this process. And if you have any other questions or any other concerns about the process, please, I do ask you to address those questions to me. Additionally, I will ask our attorney, Andy Faber, to comment on one of the accusations that the applicant has continued to make, that the tentative map is statutorily approved. And I would like, Andy, if you would not mind commenting on that, and when the Streamlining Act actually would state that this tentative map would be approved without going through due process.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
Sure, thank you. The applicant has claimed that the Permit Streamlining Act and the subdivision map require that the subdivision map in front of you be deemed approved. And he has also, I believe, expressed the view that because of that, conditions cannot be put on the map. We've researched it, we disagree. The Permit Streamlining and Subdivision Map Act time limits generally start running when environmental review is completed, which actually isn't completed because the mitigated negative declaration is in front of you tonight. Now, it could be that that review could have been done earlier, but as staff has explained, it was a long process. But our conclusion in any event is that the map is in front of you at this point in time in a duly noticed public hearing, the way other maps come in front of you without any presumption that you cannot act and use your discretion in approving or disapproving the map subject to the requirements of the Subdivision Map Act. But we do not believe that there is any legal problem at this point in terms of the map having been deemed approved or your inability to add appropriate conditions or deal with the conditions proposed by staff. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Council, any other comments? Christy, if you don't mind, I did have one quick comment or question. Is it seems out of the ordinary to have the Planning Commission, or any commission for that matter, that is providing input to the council to take an item up without all the information in front of them, specifically the Planning Commission, and not having the environmental work before them. In my mind, that's a little like, putting together a puzzle with a major piece missing. And so I just kind of want to, what prevented staff from holding off on getting it to the Planning Commission until the environmental work was done?
Yeah, and my apologies. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well, so maybe I didn't make myself very clear. But the applicant went forward to council
right
in early summer and was requesting that the council take up this application. So in essence, staff was directed to take up the application to council. To do that, we had to take it to Planning Commission. And we were directed to be moving forward with this application based on the applicant wanting to be in front of the decision-making body, regardless of whether the environmental was done.
Regardless of whether, honestly, I don't remember that part of the conversation. It seems to me to have the council say, yes, move this forward, I would think that the council would say, yes, move this forward with all the information that's needed.
The direction that we felt we got, and the request from the applicant was he wanted this in front of the decision-making body. He was accusing staff of prolonging the time frame to process this. And in essence, we were trying to work with the applicant because the applicant never wanted us to move forward with a denial. And the applicant came forward to council and sternly requested that his application be moved forward to council.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christy. Council, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so I would just ask all of you to think to yourselves, was that, your intention or my intention to get this before the Planning Commission without the environmental stuff? I think that's just something we need to ask ourselves now, because in the future we might be faced with the same thing, and so we need to I guess, be very clear and explicit on our direction in the future. Yes, sir.
If I may, I think I have a little information to add to that. I believe that, this is just reading the record, but the project being recommended for denial put the project in the position of not requiring the environmental review to be completed. If we were going to deny it, we did not need to complete environmental review. So spending the money to complete that environmental review when we were recommending denial, that was more or less the basis. We didn't want to, why it caused an additional expense if we're going to deny the project.
Okay, so counsel, everything I just said. So that, did the environmental work only take place after the Planning Commission recommended approval?
The environmental work was approximately 90% complete. The project description was still in flux because there were some changes being made to the project. So once the recommendation was made by the Commission to approve, we resumed environmental review, got the last 10% or so of the project details, and completed the document and released it. So we essentially, I resumed work on this on June 18th. The action by the Commission was on June 7th. So we immediately went forward with completing that piece of it.
All right. So I think my comments still stand. I think we just have to be very clear on our directions to staff in the future. But I certainly understand that if a project is being denied, then there's no reason to move forward with the environmental work until the Planning Commission weighs in on the item. Okay, thank you. So go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. It's my pleasure to be here tonight presenting to you for the first time, and the first, I hope, of many. This project, as Christy has pointed out, has been through a series of reviews with staff and the applicant, working on a proposal that we felt we could support and bring to you for an action, a positive action. The project's located just across the creek from Gilroy High School, adjacent to Villaggio Residential Development to the, I believe that's, let's see, to the east and south. And then Glen Loma Development is to the west, as well as the Christmas Hill Park and the Glen Loma Open Space, and the new Sidney Castor Park and the Los Animas Elementary School. The tentative map that's in its final development essentially represents what you see on the map on this exhibit, with 14 lots that start from Greenfield Drive into a private road, Greenfield Circle, that is a loop road with 8 lots in the center, 6 lots backing up to the Uvas Creek Preserve, and then 2 large lots at the entry to the site. The 2 lots at the entry are the ones that contain a large oak grove, and then of course you've got the Uvas Creek parcel and preserve back here, which is an important component of the project. I want to point out that the net density of this development has been and remains 3 units per net acre. This is an 8+ acre site, which would have a potential net density of 25 units, or gross density of 25 units, but given all the constraints, it was determined back in 2006 that with the sensitivities and the desire to preserve a lot of this lot, 14 units would be an appropriate density, and so the developer has worked to keep within the minimum density on this site. I would note the applicant has worked very hard to promote the plan that they felt was the appropriate plan. Likewise, staff, planning, police, public works, and parks have worked hard to try to get the plan to also recognize the importance of the Uvas Creek open space plan. This plan provides 150 feet from the creek bank to the edge of development, which is certainly a positive aspect. The original proposal had the setback at approximately 85 feet, so we're able to work this back to a more appropriate setback, and we appreciate that change in the project. The concept in 2006, just as a matter of history, it's not meant to be a pro and con or a debate over the validity of this plan versus the new plan, but this just shows what was presented in 2006 and more or less the basis for a lower density. We had an oak grove we felt was important to preserve, and we had this creek area that was important to preserve. So this plan would have required a PUD. We can't compel the applicant to go through a planned unit development, but it does show the important areas of the site that were identified at that time, and staff has maintained that those areas are important to preserve. In terms of the history, again, we had the allocations granted in 2006 for 14 clustered lots. That was a competitive process whereby the applicant had to compete to get these allocations. An application was submitted and then ultimately did not move forward. In 2016, the current application was submitted for traditional R1 lots, And in 2018, in June, we took this to the Planning Commission with a recommendation for denial, and they recommended approval of the project. So staff moved forward with completion of CEQA and has brought the project forward to you tonight for an action. Some of the pertinent policy questions that have been on part of this analysis include the net density calculation, that is an appropriate method of calculating density for the site. The concern with lots backing to the open space preserve, the Uvas Creek plan calls for one of two things, either a frontage road or a 25-foot setback buffer along open space and development lands. The other is building envelopes have been proposed on lots 1 and 2 and 9 through 14 in order to protect the sensitive trees, as Christy had pointed out. The other couple of more minor but important policy questions have to do with when we accept new lands, we have a sensitivity to the cost of maintenance. This does finish the Uvas Creek Preserve open space plan, so we're supportive of that. We appreciate that. It includes a bike path, which we're very happy to have. The cost of maintenance is something that the city tends to pass on to the developer in perpetuity, so the HOA would be required in this case to be responsible for the maintenance of the park until such time as the city may be able to be in a position to accept it. And then the site also requires significant homeowners maintenance and enforcement of the private roads, the on-site drainage basins, and the areas behind lots 9 through 14. Just a little closer view of the lots and the setbacks. You have lots 9 through 14 have these double retaining walls, which basically establish this higher grade for development. What this does is allow the lots to drain positively to existing drainage improvements in the Villaggio estates. The project is designed so that it will not require a new outfall into Uvas Creek. And then you see the creek setback is here, and the lots are pulled back away from the setback line, and we have the trail running, a new trail that would run connecting Villaggio and then heading to Glen Lomas. Again, a closer view of building envelopes on lots 1 and 2. Again, these were requested to be shown to show that these trees would be preserved. The applicant did indicate concern with having building envelopes and would rather be held to the R1 setback requirements. If that happens, then these trees would not be preserved. So that's the one point we felt this was important, and removal of those would eliminate that protection. So in terms of our analysis, we have determined that the 3 to 7 unit density required in the general plan is satisfied based on net density given the amount of preservation proposed on the lot. The lot sizes meet the minimum 6,660 square feet, with the average size being 10,000 square feet. The largest lots are just under ½ acre each. And then the private road, local street, meets the 36-foot road standard. Also, it completes, as I said, the Uvas Creek plan, which is an important final piece that the city's very happy to have. I think it'll serve the community well. It's got a great bike trail running through it. The project has been subject to objective standards of review, and based on those standards, we found that with the conditions we proposed, we could make the findings required under the MAP Act to support this request, based on the recommendation of the Commission and based on the conditions that we've identified for you tonight. The environmental review essentially came up with a couple of very important aspects that need to be protected. The first is 28 trees would be removed. That's after some modification by the applicant, which we appreciate, with the replacement required at 3 to 1. Many of these trees will be removed with the subdivision improvements, so those need to be addressed at that time. Some may be removed with subsequent developments of the lots, and those would be replaced at that time. The retaining wall and fence behind the property, the double retaining wall, it requires an open fence along that retaining wall in order to meet the objectives of our zoning standards, and the applicants agreed to that, and that is, as designed and conditioned, is agreeable amongst both of us that it's a satisfactory proposal. The one thing about the retaining wall, it is a common wall supporting many lots, so there's an aspect about that I want to go into before I close my presentation. We did have one comment. It was from the Water District. They have property behind there. They were concerned with drainage. We've addressed that comment. We don't see any remaining issue with that. That's in your packet before you, so you can take action on the environmental document for this project as proposed. Just real quickly, I wanted to show you the tree exhibit. This is the exhibit the applicant presented. Down here, there's a little note that the highlighted trees will not be removed. There's several trees down in this area that are noted in the environmental document that will be preserved based on a revised grading plan to include the double retaining wall. So this is a very important area of the site, and it will be protected as designed, and we support that. This is a view from the applicant giving us an illustration of how he proposes to design that wall. Again, this would be a detail we'd want to see in the improvement plans. We have also told the applicant we need to see the landscape detail for that in the improvement plans. The position on that, I'm not sure where he is with that, but we're asking for that. We think that this wall, as shown, would although not ideal, would be designed to be attractive and satisfactory. Again, with the landscaping. So just to move to closing, rounding off my presentation, I just want to point out in our conditions, we have a requirement for improvement plan details that include the street lights and street trees as part of the subdivision improvement, and common landscaping and retaining wall details as part of the improvement plans, and tree mitigation to be proposed as part of the final map action, so that we have that clearly established at that final map stage. The final map is the time when we demonstrate compliance with the tentative map. We need the conditions and the analysis to occur now. We've done that analysis now. The building envelope restrictions also are included in the conditions to reinforce the fact that these are required as part of the proposal, so there's no question about that they're important. They preserve trees. We want to keep those restrictions. The open fencing design along lots 9 and 14, it is proposed by the applicant, but it's important to reinforce that by including that in the conditions. Staff also felt it's important to have an easement through the site. The property has, if you look at the tentative map, you have a bike trail connection that comes into the site, also I believe somewhere right around here. And then you have Los Animas School up here, and then a public road connection here. So planning and engineering felt it makes sense. People are going to want to use this to go through the property. It makes sense to have a public access easement through there. There is a PSE, a public services easement that would go through the property, so that may just as well do the same thing, but we think it would be a good idea to recognize that. It is a private road. The applicant is opposed to that. We think it's a good idea to have that. And then last but not least, we want to make sure the conditions clearly identify what the homeowners association's maintenance obligations are. We feel it's important to communicate that in the tentative map conditions so that when a developer goes forward with a final map, they understand what is required, and we can have CC&Rs that reflect those requirements. So the options tonight are to approve the map with the conditions drafted by staff or with modified conditions as the council feels is appropriate. The council could choose to refer this back to the Planning Commission for further redesign, or the Planning Commission or the City Council could deny the application. Again, our resolution or our recommendation is for you to adopt the resolution adopting the mitigated negative declaration and monitoring program prepared for the project. Approve the tentative map with the conditions we've recommended for this Greenfield subdivision project. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions now or as the council finds need.
So, Craig, is with regards to this improvement plan that needs to be turned in or submitted, you had talked about the retaining wall as part of that, or one of the items within that improvement plan. Is the retaining wall addressed at all under the conditions here? If it is, can you highlight it to me?
I believe it is. I'll need to skim through my documents real quick and locate that.
Okay, so maybe after public comment, give you time to look for that. And then also, you had mentioned the bike issue. I was distracted up here on the dais, so I want to kind of follow up. What was the comments regarding the bike lane, I guess, or bike issue? Staff wants something, and the applicant was opposed.
Right, there's the Uvas Creek Trail obviously is here. The trail runs along the Villaggio subdivision, and then there's a spur that goes out into this parcel, which he will connect to. So you'll have pedestrians and bicyclists who will come from the subdivision down to the creek. Then Greenfield Drive connects public street to private street here. The access easement would be so that people could, from the Villaggio tract, could walk through this way to Sidney Casper Park or the school versus the route around the street that runs behind the development. So it's just a matter of just acknowledging what's going to occur and asking for a public access easement to be formally recorded so that we don't end up having to enforce a situation, the city being brought into a conflict between these residents complaining about people crossing through their property and then having to be involved in that. The access easement would eliminate that. They cannot gate this. They cannot block access in any way. So it just, to us, makes sense from a practical point of view to maintain, to have that recorded.
So help me understand. So this issue still has to, that issue still has to get resolved.
It's required as a condition. The applicant's opposed
Okay,
to it.
so where is that condition at?
43, it looks like.
Yeah, it's 43.
Looks like the other one's 45.
Okay, there we go.
Right, thank you. Yeah, all the special conditions are from 37 through 45, 46.
Okay.
May I ask something on the same
yes.
subject? How does that affect, though, the fact that these streets in this report, which I thought was very well written, by the way, easy to follow this entire report, the history, everything, but these streets are proposed to be private streets, right?
Correct.
City, not city patrolled, not, right, like the way Eagle Ridge was supposed to have been in the beginning, too. Okay, so how does having this public access affect the fact that then the city has no responsibility to patrol?
Well, that's, I think, a fair point and probably gets maybe to the heart of what the applicant's concern is with having the public crossing private property. We require easements commonly. We're requiring an easement. This is essentially an easement here, the creek trail. It's a fairly standard method of providing public access through property. It wouldn't impart any further enforcement responsibility upon the city per se, other than establishing that right where people currently cross this property at the creek now. It's
Not making sense to me.
okay. I think it's just a.
I mean, I get the reason. I get what you're saying
Yeah.
would be the nice reason for it, but since it is private, it's private, and
Correct.
if you've got public being able to go into something that's private, then that community is being asked to support people outside the community. I mean.
Yeah, fair enough, and it's I'm being relatively new. I'm not sure clear of all the nuances in Gilroy and every other community I've worked for. This has been a standard practice. If that does not seem an appropriate method here, that's perfectly understandable. My goal was to try to resolve what I envision to be something that's going to occur on this property, and the city, trying to avoid the city getting dragged into trying to enforce a private issue, and then having this development come to us wanting to gate that.
Understood, unless you're thinking that ultimately this is not going to be private. Ultimately, the city is going to be patrolling these streets.
I'll go ahead and let Chrissy
Okay.
speak to it further.
It's probably easier to, on a more typical analogy to explain is the connectivity of, think of a commercial project where you have several different owners, but we do have the easements of connectivity. It's the same thing with the neighborhoods. We want to have neighborhood connectivity. If we don't allow that connectivity of neighborhoods, you would have folks, children from that Villaggio, having to go way out around and up Lucchesa to get back to the school or the park. So it's prudent land planning to always plan for connectivity from neighborhood to neighborhood. And that makes healthier communities as well, because it encourages our neighborhoods to interact.
Okay, so where else do we have this then in the city right now?
So where else we have something exactly like this?
Well,
so
I mean, where else
Lomas
do we have privately, where the city, it's private, so the city doesn't, we don't use city services to patrol the area, but yet the public is allowed to go through it?
Well, in your Glen Loma specific plan, there's going to be a lot of trails that are privately owned that the public is allowed to go through. I don't know for a fact if that's also true in Hecker Pass specific plan, but I do know that is true for the Glen Loma specific plan entire area.
Okay. I'm really just asking.
It's good
just
questions.
trying to run that through.
Very good questions.
Yeah, and I see it less as, I mean, you know, Councilmember, you're using the word patrol. I'm just thinking as far as, you know, somebody on a bike wanting to connect to the trail or somebody walking wanting to connect to the trail. There's nothing that prevents, you know, a citizen from walking into some other private HOA community and.
Well, except gates.
Except for the gates.
Gates, but
yeah.
that's what we're saying that we're not going to allow.
Yeah.
That's what this condition is
Yeah,
doing.
exactly. So, okay, thank you. Anything else, sir?
That concludes my presentation.
Okay.
if you're-
Council, any questions, comments? Yes.
Can you go back to the one where you show the trees?
Oops.
So how many trees is it?
28 are to be removed. The ones in black are clearly to be preserved, and then they had highlighted several others that would be preserved, so we end up.
How many will be preserved?
I have to go back and check the numbers on it. I think there's
Okay, how do you,
80 some odd trees on there, so.
I went out there and there's a lot of brush. The lot's pretty much overgrown with brush, and there's some dead trees and some laying on the ground. But I didn't see that many decent trees to save. So how do you decide what's a tree that merits saving and just shrubs that should be taken out?
We have an arborist report that's in the environmental document, and that went through and did an assessment. There are a number of trees that are in fair to poor to good condition. It's a broad range. We predominantly are focusing on saving healthy trees. Of these additional trees to be preserved, this was a late change. We didn't go into detail in looking at the quality of these, but they're in an area that's to be protected anyway. So the arborist report is what we rely on. If it ends up that they're going to take out some of these trees, we would look at them to see their condition and health. And if they don't warrant saving, they wouldn't have to mitigate. But it's basically, essentially, it's based on this arborist report that we have in your staff report, and that goes tree by tree and lists their value.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Tucker.
So I actually have a lot of questions that I'll hold for public comment. I would like to hear from the public. But one question, I've been around a while, and I just don't remember seeing all these conditions on a tentative map, but one in particular is a landscape policy having to do with the retaining wall. And honestly, I understand the need for the retaining wall. I understand all the things that are majority of the conditions, what you're trying to do. I don't see any reason why you need to put a condition for landscaping. I mean, if this is going to be up to the individual homeowner, how they're going to do the backyard landscaping, what does the city have to do with going in there telling them, between the retaining wall, you have to have this, and this. And so some of this I just don't understand, and I'd like to have a little bit more detail as why is this required, and I just don't see the benefit of it, other than the hardship to the applicant.
Certainly. So when the applicant proposed having the double retaining walls to save the trees, staff's concern was graffiti on the back of the walls, and the applicant willingly said they would provide landscaping of a nature that would screen the walls to eliminate the graffiti, and also landscaping that's briarberry or prickly, to discourage people from trying to climb the walls as well. And so that was something that was brought forward by the applicant. It's memorialized as a condition of approval. And that was to mitigate the concern staff had with the walls being a graffiti target.
But didn't you say that the homeowners association would be responsible for taking care of that? I'm assuming that's why you wanted a homeowners association.
They're going to have to have a
taking care of the graffiti, I mean.
Yeah, they're going to have a homeowners association anyways because they have a private roadway. So just by virtue of that, they are already in the homeowners association realm. And so to provide the homeowners association the responsibility for that back area where the homeowners are not going to be eyes on all the time made sense.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, so let's turn it over to the public here. Let me go ahead and open up the public hearing. This is an opportunity for the public to come forward and address the council on this item. Shauna.
James Sooner, followed by John Taft, and then Tom Klein.
Good evening, Council. James Sooner. I'm appearing on behalf of New Hope Church this evening. John Taft, the original project manager, is here, as are some of the board members. I've got my engineer, Amanda, here to answer any engineering questions. This project has a long history, as do most of us. I've got a long reputation in Gilroy. I've done about 18 projects. I've got a combined voting record of almost 500 to 6. We've never had a denied project. On our last project, Harvest Park, I agreed to a lot of conditions of approval because I was under a time constraint, and they were delivered to us at a very late date. And because of my contractual obligations, I agreed to those conditions knowing that they were problematic. I then appeared in front of the council over 3 times to get those conditions modified or removed to facilitate the affordable component of that project. So that's why we're in this basically a semantics battle. And also, the Planning Commission was in June. The first time we saw these conditions was September 29th. So we had plenty of time to work this out, and we had plenty of time to, as Christy said, to, work together to try to do it. But it's a little disingenuous to say that their staff's working with us when they're forcing us into a single design that they prefer. And I keep reminding them that I don't only have to, acquiesce to their demands. I have 7 planning commissioners, 7 city council members, all the neighbors. I've got financiers, investors, and ultimately my homeowners. And I can't say yes to every demand that they can come up with or every condition. I just cannot. So I don't mean to be difficult. I don't I don't mean to be rude about it, but sometimes I have to tell them no. No, we're not going to remove the paseos in Harvest Park. No, we're not going to build the bridge before we build the houses, etc. And then it's up to, this is my relief from that process, is that we get some other opinions involved and we kind of, arrive at a middle ground. So with that being said, this is a R1 development. It's zoned R1. It's always been zoned R1. And we chose to do an R1 project specifically because the council has directed staff to not approve PUDs. In fact, we're blocking any new residential applications right now. And so to minimize the risk to R.J. Dyer's investment dollars, I told him, look, I can design a project that cannot be denied. We'll conform with all R1 standards, all setback requirements, all environmental reviews, etc. We don't really have a problem with any mitigation measures in the neg deck. Neg deck and the tentative map are separate. So we formed a joint venture 2015. We brought it in. John took it through a paid DRG meeting to get these kind of comments, get this stuff out. That was 3 years ago. And so, it took us a while to get here. So I don't want to be the guy that reminds you all that this is America and we have property rights, or that we all raised our right hand and swore to uphold the Constitution. But a big part of this country is our ability to develop our property and to have full and fair use of the property. Property has been owned by New Hope Church since 1979. It's always been zoned R1, specifically designed to comply with all R1, avoid the significant trees, reduce grading, minimize the environmental impacts. This is the general plan language in support of the project, prioritizing infill development, the location of growth, urban growth boundary, economic development. This is a $12 million project. The city itself collects almost $1 million just in flat-out fees. 15% of our $2.5 million infrastructure budget is a plan check and inspection fee, and then impact fees of $750K. Plus, all those dollars are locally circulated among local subcontractors, etc. That's huge.
James, I need you to wrap up, please.
Excuse me?
I need you to wrap up. You're over time.
Applicants are given 10 minutes. Roland, this has been 3 years in the making. You just
Hey,
said
no,
staff-
hang on. Wait a second. Applicants are given 10 minutes. Okay, you're already a minute over. You spent quite a bit of time talking about Harvest Park. I'm going to give you another minute. Go.
They failed to mention that this is in the staff report, under the housing element. It's a prioritized infill site. The project provides custom lots. They refused to process a CEQA application. They had a neg deck in their possession, an administrative neg deck in their possession in November of last year, failed to provide it. Timeline for CEQA is 4 to 6 months. The Permit Streamlining Act limits you to 180-day review once the application is complete, not the environmental review, the application. It's deemed approved if no action is taken. Same thing with the State Map Act. It's 180 days. It's an approval process, not a denial process. We can get into the individual conditions of approval. Grading concerns, this is Glen Loma. This is the most intensive grading operation I think I've ever seen. They basically stripped this out 6 feet deep and then piled all the dirt up. Tree conditions, 27 trees be removed, 71 replacement trees. Look at that. This is the new reality. I don't even know where I can put 76 oak trees on that property. The homes backing onto Uvas were not a concern on the adjacent project, but they are on this one. In fact, they're a basis for a denial. Not even mentioned in the prior staff report. How many planners? 9. 9 planners. How's that possible, Roland? Design flexibility. If I can have some design flexibility, look at this. I can eliminate the retaining wall. The foundation wall for this house acts as the retaining wall. I can eliminate the retaining walls and save more trees. This is what we could potentially put in there. It's assisted living. This is basically age-in-place architecture so that things are ADA accessible, and basically it's 6-bed care facility, allowable under any zoning designation. There's an A, modern design. There's a B, there's a C. So here's your top 3 reasons to approve.
Hang on, James, hang on. Council, so we are at about 6 minutes for him. With your indulgence, I'd like to go ahead and give him a few more minutes to finish up your presentation. Go.
Thank you, Roland. The project conforms with all the City R1 development standards. It provides a unique housing opportunity by either doing custom lots or the senior age in place that is rushed through. And the property has been identified as a priority infill site for the housing element. So here's the requested actions. I want you to approve the map with the same conditions of approval that were given to the Planning Commission. I'd like you to approve the neg deck with the same conditions of approval that it was circulated with. We found new conditions that were included in the staff report that were not brought to our attention previously that are trying to expose us to wetlands that aren't there. And we want to do some kind of a mandatory ethics training to prevent this from happening to future applicants. This is unacceptable. You know, all we're trying to do is get to a fair conclusion, and dragging us through a 3-year process, it's not working. And I would like to hear some more, about this MAP Act and the CEQA timelines, because the state puts those in place specifically to prevent this from happening. And what staff's saying is that if we don't agree with every condition that they dream up, if we don't allow them to design the project, then we can't even get to the city council, that they're just going to deny it at staff level. What does that say about your authority as council people, right? It undermines the entire process. I'm not the first applicant to say this. I just say it a little bit stronger. All right, you're going to hear from some other speakers. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, James. Council, do you have any questions for James right now? Otherwise, we're going to go on to other speakers. Thank you, James. Next speaker.
John Taft, followed by Tom Klein, and then Patricia Benson.
Good evening, Council.
Okay, so just to be clear now, everybody else has got 3 minutes.
I know I can never get done in 3 minutes, but I'll try in this instance. This project has been a poster child for what's wrong in the development process in Gilroy. You talked about the 9 different planners that I've had to work with. But let me go back on a couple other points that were made. I just want to bring up some of the issues. You asked, why did we go to the Planning Commission without having the environmental initial study done? We wrote the check for the initial study back on August 15th, 2016. So it's 2 years after that before we got a draft to look at and to get to circulate. The staff refused to process the initial study, and they held it back and held it over our heads in terms of we've got to conform to what they want. So that's issue number 1. Number 2, they talked about the design and the density. We presented that density in the DRG meeting, And the people that were in the DRG meeting went along with the density that we had proposed. It wasn't until about the fourth amendment to the plan that it started to come back. In fact, it was in the Planning Commission report, which I didn't see until it was rolled out publicly. That's the first time I saw it, and that's where they challenged it. So they've been always sandbagging us and coming back in with information that wasn't presented to us, so we had time to respond. The redesign of the perimeter road, same thing. We presented that in the DRG meeting. We went through the DRG meeting, we went through the initial application, First Amendment, Second Amendment. It wasn't until the Third Amendment that was brought up that we needed to redesign the perimeter road. And on top of that, they said the only way we're going to get this project approved is we left from being an R1 project to a PUD. That's just unacceptable. When I can't even process a map on a piece of property that's zoned, unconditionally permitted for R1 property. That just doesn't make sense to me, but that's what we've been told by the staff. The Uvas Creek Park Preserve, I just saw in the report today that I got over the weekend that we're now required to maintain ownership of parcel A, and they want us to give a public easement across it. We're supposed to maintain the open space area. Have anybody thought about what that does to the cost structure of this project? I mean, that's ridiculous that we have to do something like that and to spring it onto us in the report that went to you. When I look at the report that went to you, I see they repeated a number of the mistakes in facts and information that was in the report that went to the Planning Commission. I don't understand what staff's doing here, but I tell you, I don't know if I'm over time or not, but I'm very concerned about that. And I don't want to even get into the issue of the top of the bank and the environmental study stuff. What's been done by the staff is just unacceptable. I'm aware of at least 2 violations of the Subdivision Map Act. I'm aware of 2 violations of the CEQA by the city. Anyway, you may not want to talk about it, but that's what's going on in this project. And that's, to me, that's just another indication of how this whole process is broken. It needs to be fixed. I'm willing to take you back through this project and give you a study session to show you the mess that goes on when you get down into the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next speaker.
Tom Klein, followed by Patricia Benson and Connie Rogers.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for allowing me to spend a little time with you. I represent the face of New Hope Community Church. I've been a part of that body for over 30 years and involved in every aspect of the church. I've also walked probably every inch of that property, both scaling it. I actually had to cut weeds down because we had a few fires started over time and created some problems for the homeowners there. So I've been intimately involved with this property over the years. The church bought the property back in '79 to build a church. But through time and through checking, it wasn't big enough for the church to build a facility there. So then we looked at the next thing to do would be to sell it, which would, you know, with all the residences being built around there, the properties, we figured we could market it. And we tried with 5 different developers to no avail. So we had Bob Dyer, RJ Group, and James Sooner approach us 3 years ago with the thought of creating this project and basically helping the church finally be able to sell it and use that money to look for a home. We currently are on Morioka, and as you know, and also the Planning Commission, we're in a conditional use permit, which means a clock is ticking on us to get out of there. You really don't want us there. And so this project would go a long way to helping us achieve that goal, to find a permanent place for our church. I know a lot of people have said, you know, they didn't realize that there was going to be a development there. But like I said, back in the 90s, we put signs out there, future home of New Hope Community Church. Matter of fact, one of them burned down on one of the fires. I was part of putting those signs up. So intimately, I've been involved in that. Has always been our intent that that property would be a resource for us, one way or the other, to move forward in this community. We invest, as you know, a lot in this community through the people that go to our church, but also our staff and how they really invest in different aspects of this community. And so tonight, I'm representing our pastor. Malcolm, he's in Europe, coming back tomorrow, so he wasn't able to be here. So basically, I'm representing him and the church and asking you to consider this project, your approval for this project, so that we can move forward for what we need to do in the future. And I thank you for your time.
Patricia Benson, followed by Connie Rogers, and then Zachary Hilton.
Hi, Pat.
Mayor Velasco and council members, I'm Patricia Benson, and I live in the Glen Loma Ranch subdivision adjacent to the proposed Greenfield subdivision. In addition, I also serve on the Parks and Recreation Commission, but I'm not here in that capacity. I'm here as a citizen. I have concerns regarding this subdivision and the environmental assessment that was performed by H.D. Harvey and Associates. The city, the Water District, and the State Fish and Game has consistently identified the Uvas Creek channel top of bank or edge of riparian corridor at or above the 100-year flood level on any adjacent sloping channel banks. I believe that the proposed sloping backyards running downslope into the storm channel with the retaining walls as proposed by the project will likely create an impact to high storm inundation and stormwater conveyance. The city staff, through a public information request I made, has provided me with the information on the height of the 100-year flood elevation per FEMA at 213 feet. The applicant and H.D. Harvey and Associations are misrepresenting the top of bank and 100-year flood elevation as they continue to argue for a 196-foot elevation, which is actually a 15 to 25-year storm flow event. This project should not be allowed to circumvent FEMA's set flood elevation level. There is some confusion about this, and I think this warrants looking at, taking a step back and looking at it, for sure. Both the Glen Loma and Villaggio developments accepted high flow storm channel event elevation. Why should Greenfield not have to adhere to the same? Regarding the 4 lots in the Glen Loma subdivision, those are above the flood level. There's why those 4 lots access back to a creek area. The environmental consultant is incorrectly defining Uvas Creek as a perennial stream. Uvas Creek is not a perennial stream and is normally a dry channel in this area of Uvas Creek several months of the year. The entire Pajaro watershed, including Uvas Creek, is considered an episodic river system, subject to flash flooding, and both state and federal regulatory agencies do not use centerline river classification method for urban street plan planning, as Mr. Harvey suggested, or the Harvey firm suggested. The 35-foot riparian setback shown on the Harvey graphic, which is here, and you've already received this probably in a, have more if you need one, does not reflect the 100-foot habitat buffer zone. He shows it as 35. It's a 100-foot habitat buffer zone used as a condition of development on the completed upstream and downstream subdivision parcels adjacent to this project. The Greenfield subdivision is planned directly up against the Uvas Creek Park Preserve and a future Class 1 pathway. The Greenfield subdivision parcel is the last key parcel along the Uvas Channel that will complete and provide public trail master plan connecting the Santa Teresa Bridge to the La Chesa Bridge on the Christmas Hill side of the Uvas DeBell Creek Park Preserve, and it needs to conform to the master plans accordingly. I think it's a great thing that they're talking about doing this paved bike path. And I don't have any objection to that part of this. It's mostly the flood concerns. City Council, I think it's time that our city also develop an urban streams ordinance to settle all debate for channels and buffering so that the community is clearly and evenly applied. There are also city policies addressing land use adjacency that need to be addressed.
Pat, I need you to wrap up your comments, please.
It's pretty straightforward here. The general plan on the creek protection, protecting it. and not having new development encroach upon it. And even in the staff report, it says it does. As far as the Parks and System Master Plan, the acquisition and development of public parklands abutting residential property is thoroughly discouraged due to historic conflicts. This includes backyard and side set yard residential property lines. Okay? And skipping down.
Thank you, Pat.
All right.
So the last point is the Uvas Creek Park Preserve, and you've identified it here in your letter to us.
Right, and then suggesting that maybe go get the PUD, because then they could adjust those lots that approach, if you have a PD, and make them less than 6,000 square feet. I live in a subdivision that has 3,500 square foot lots. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Pat.
Connie Rogers, Zachary Hilton, and Herman Garcia.
Good evening, council members. I'm speaking only on behalf of myself, and I don't have prepared remarks, and I do not know the details of this project. What I did hear tonight that I was pleased with was that a compromise had been reached, because that's what we're all here for, is to try to find the common ground, right? And I do know that this has been a long and painful process for both the applicant and the staff, so I would certainly hope that it would be a learning opportunity for both sides. And other than that, I am in favor of this kind of project. This is what Measure H, the urban growth boundary, hopes for, that we would do infill projects, and this one has certainly been waiting a very long time, and is, appears to me to be nicely designed. As I said, I don't know about the technicalities of it, but I would urge you to try to reach that compromise so that this infill project can go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Zachary Hilton, followed by Herman Garcia.
Good evening, Council. Zachary Hilton, the Chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Commission. So this is the first time that you're going to see the Safe Routes to School report in your packet. And one of the reasons why is that it should stimulate some conversation. So you've had a condition that staff wants to put through the property so they can have access to the school. So one of the things that we do as a commission is that we feel strongly that if you can ever activate a trail or a paved bike trail to get kids and walkers off the streets, that's what we suggest. So when this property, we noticed that it had that paved trail in the back, and they weren't taking away any of the trails that are already down there running along Uvas Creek. Anytime you can activate that creek bed, whether it's with signage or telling neighbors, where to go, we're all about that. And basically, it's just to keep people off the streets and provide that safe access. So we hope to bring you more of those reports and get those in there to stimulate discussion on, infrastructure that's around there, and whether it's a lack of or to show a strength of. Thank you.
Herman Garcia.
Herman Garcia, the CEO, Executive Director of CHEER, Coastal Habitat Education, Environmental Restoration. And I'm sorry for the limping, but I was walking to Sacramento when I came back for an item on your agenda. Not this one. I haven't reviewed the plan or the documents on this project, but I did hear two numbers that concern me in the staff report, and that was 125-foot setback and 150-foot setback. So which is it?
Address the council. Address the council.
Okay. So which number is it?
Okay.
Oh, can you tell me?
Well, we'll follow up with staff on that.
Oh, okay. Because keep in mind that the Fish and Game Code also, federal code, has a 150-foot setback. You can't negotiate that, okay? It's a 150-foot setback or you're breaking the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean, is there anything else? Nope. Okay, Craig, one of the last questions raised was 125 versus 150 foot setback. I know that I saw in here one of the conditions regarding the habitat plan, and I know it's in compliance with the habitat plan, but can you address that issue of 125 versus 150 feet?
Yes, certainly. It's very simple. It is 150 feet from the top of Creek Bank. That's what's required. So if I said 125 at some point, I misspoke. On the plan, sheet 3, it shows 150 feet.
150 feet. 150 feet. All right. Oops, I just lost my document here. Okay. Back to council for discussion. Let me go ahead and close the public hearing. And Councilmember Tucker, is this from last time or is this new?
Right
you want
now.
to speak?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to clarify a couple of things. So, well, one of them was the HCP. So if I remember reading the report, the applicant is getting, following along the HCP rules and regulations, and everything is clear. So I just wanted the audience to know that all the requirements were met by the habitat plan. The other question was, what was I going to, just now my mind just went blank. There's so much. There was, oh no, okay. My question to staff is, so what is the difference? I heard the gentleman say that it was the environmental review was 90% complete before it went to Planning Commission, and that there was really only 10% left. So what is the difference between the project that was sent to Planning Commission and the project that's sent to us? If it was 90% complete, even though you did denial, then I would think that whatever was given to the Planning Commission that they reviewed and approved would be acceptable now. So I'm trying to understand the difference of that, and I was wondering if the chair of the Planning Commission might come up and make a comment as to what they were thinking, because I don't have a clear view of what they saw and what compelled them to approve it.
They saw the exact same plan you have. It's the exact same plan. The details were with the details on the retaining wall design, details on the tree protection and removal, and then the final conditions. They did not have draft conditions. So we had to finalize the project description as presented to the commission, give that to the consultant with some additional details about the wall, landscaping, tree removal, and some updated reports, and have them revise the document to reflect that plan. So there was work done up till that point. That plan was submitted in March. Environmental review was prepared up till that point. No further review was done on the plan submitted to the commission, so they had to continue from that point. So they did see the Planning Commission saw the same plan. They did not have the I don't recall if they had the environmental document.
So when the applicant requested that we approve the plan that was sent to the Planning Commission,
that's the exact same plan you have before you tonight.
But then there's additional conditions tonight.
That's with the final conditions, right. When it went to the Planning Commission, as far as I understand, there weren't conditions because it was recommended for denial.
For denial, right. I understood that. And then the conditions are 37 through what?
37 through 46.
Through 46.
Those are the conditions that he had some concerns with, that he provided a document to you regarding.
Okay. And the condition of, and then did you want to bring that up? What the previous speaker, one of the previous speakers talked about the floodplain. Can you address that?
I can, at a very high level. That has been extensively reviewed by our engineering staff and by our environmental consultant. The environmental consultant is here, but I think I can address that pretty clearly. We looked at the floodplain. We looked at the flood elevations. We identified the setbacks required per the Habitat Conservation Plan. The development is way outside of the floodplain. It's elevated. It's not going to be subject to flooding. So that concern doesn't impact the project, even if that line were slightly different. What's important is where the riparian vegetation is and where the riparian habitat is, and that's clearly protected within the 150-foot setback.
And that's clearly already been approved, so to speak, by the HCP.
Yes.
Reviewed and approved.
Yes, it's been reviewed. In fact, our consultant who did the environmental is actually our consultant who helps us with the HCP, so they're very familiar with the plan.
Okay. Okay, that's it for now.
Thank you. Councilmember Peter Leroy Munoz.
Greg, don't go anywhere. I had a quick question just to build on this, and I want to make sure that we all understand this, because I think this is a good case study for how staff works with applicants and kind of what the expectations are on both sides. I think that's important. So with regard to the conditions, I had very much the same questions that Councilmember Tucker did, but is it our regular practice, and by our I mean staff, is it staff's regular practice not to draft those final conditions if the recommendation will be to deny?
Yeah, that's a fair question. It's rare that I've ever had to bring something forward for denial, and I don't know the past practice here, but I would say that if we're bringing something forward for denial and we expect there to be a denial and we don't have the environmental completed, we would not exert the energy and effort to draft the conditions. So I'd say, yeah, that would be typical not to present that with a denial.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I want to pontificate on that yet, but I think I'll just say this. I think in the interest of fairness and the interest of making sure that all parties have all of the information, because we don't want to presume too much, even if the recommendation from staff is going to be for denial, I think it would still be helpful for the Planning Commission or any body really to know, hey, if you do decide to go, these would be the recommended conditions.
I would agree with that, and I think that we would have learned a lesson through this case to take that as a good example of how to do it differently.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Blankley.
So much of this, I think, is the result of the turnover. I mean, to have that many cooks in the kitchen over time, it's pretty hard to not end up in this situation. This is a very bad situation that happened here. But going forward, I said earlier how happy I was with this report. I'm happy that there was some kind of agreement, at least, reached, consensus. The conditions, though, what the applicant was saying is that he was suggesting we approve with conditions that went to the Planning Commission. Did any conditions go to the Planning Commission?
I understand there were not any conditions.
That's what I thought you said, but his PowerPoint said that there were conditions that went to okay, so no conditions went to the Planning Commission because it was recommended for denial. I would like to address two very specific conditions, 5 and 6, if you feel comfortable addressing those.
Yes.
Okay, 5 being notice of land use restriction, and 6 being water limitations acknowledgement. Can you speak as to the purpose of, let's start with 5?
Certainly. So condition 5 regarding a notice of land use restriction, that's been required as a standard condition since May 2015. This requirement basically is established to let potential buyers or other interested parties know that there's conditions placed upon the property and that those conditions are available at City Hall. So if the property were sold, they would know, it would give them, or if the project was approved as a tentative map before final map, somebody purchased it, they'd know, okay, this condition document exists, I can go to City Hall and receive that and retrieve that and review it. So it's more advisory, it's been helpful to have, and so we've been requiring it of every land use entitlement since 2015.
Except that it goes on the title, right? Or is that not right?
No, it is correct. It's recorded on the property. That's where people get purchasing property would have access to that information.
Yes, but when you say purchasing property, are you differentiating between the bare property or the property after it's built and homeowners selling it to another homeowner and that sort of thing?
This would be for the bare property, the current parcel. If the current parcel is approved with a tentative map and sold, this would be recorded on that property and a buyer would know where to access this information.
Okay, now let's say there's a house on it. So it's gotten as far as now it's a house.
If the subdivision doesn't get approved?
No, the subdivision gets approved. I'm saying, so you have this condition, it's on the title, right. The subdivision gets approved and built out. Now, right. Now the buyer of one of the homes, does that buyer have this restriction on their title?
So once the tentative map has been approved and then the final map has gone through its process and been approved, Then that notice of land use restriction is only pertinent to the tentative map, and then that comes off.
It comes off.
Now you're asking the next question about a house. So if a house is approved with architectural and site conditions.
Totally separate. That's a separate thing, though.
That's a separate thing.
Yeah.
If they have architectural and site conditions that they need to implement when they build their house, there would be a land use restriction on that. Once they build their house and meet all their conditions, that land use restriction would come off.
Okay.
The only time the land use restriction does not come off is a conditional use permit, because that runs with the land, and that is a continuous.
Okay, now that makes sense to me. So I was under the impression that if it goes on your title, it's staying there forever.
No.
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 Okay. How does it come off then?
The city will do an impungement, which will take it off.
Impungement. That's expungement.
Expungement, thank you.
Okay.
Expungement.
Okay. So that's how it gets off the title. And then, so now number 6, condition 6, water limitations acknowledgement.
So the water limitations acknowledgement is an advisory condition we've been applying to projects also since 2015 when we adopted a drought ordinance.
That's why I'm asking. These are recent things. Yeah.
So this was adopted, and it's advisory again. If there is a stage 3 drought condition, we would not be able to issue building permits. It would come into play at the time somebody does apply to pull a permit, but it's advisory in this case. It's just another standard condition. It's routine, so we left it on in our conditions.
Understood. I'm wondering if maybe the wording, I'm looking at the wording of the condition itself, because this is what you're suggesting we approve. And it says, developer acknowledges that because of water limitations placed on the city by its water providers, approval of this permit does not guarantee that the city will issue building permits. The wording just makes it, I mean, if you were somebody who's looking at this or potentially lending money for it, that doesn't sound advisory. Issuance of building permits may be delayed and subject to implementation and or compliance with mandated water conservation or allocation plans. That sentence is fine.
So are you suggesting maybe that we put more detail into
Well, I'm suggesting that it be more clear that this is just in the event of a stage 3 drought enacted by the city, because it doesn't sound that way.
Right. So we can clean that up.
Okay.
And we could put it in the event of a stage 3 drought declaration by the state of California and the city of Gilroy.
That would sound less, less like the city is just saying, we'll do it if we feel like it.
Write that down.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Bracco.
Yes, can you clarify something for me? We heard that this has been going on for a year, and from the applicant and some other members that came up, they said 3 years. How long has it been?
The application was submitted in March 2016. It took 18 months to be deemed complete, so that's a year and a half. And once it was deemed complete, it took another 12 months for us to work to a point where we came to a point where we agreed to disagree and took it forward for denial. So that took about another 12 months to get to that point. And then,
so it has been 3 years.
Yeah, I'd say it's pushing on 3 years at this point.
Also, when you prepare something for the planning commission, how can you recommend it for denial if you haven't finished it?
Well, it was completed. We did an analysis and found that it didn't comply with the general plan policies. So based on that, we couldn't support it. So that part of the analysis was completed based on what was presented. The applicant didn't agree to changes we felt were necessary to recommend approval. That pretty much puts us in a position of having to recommend denial. The only thing that wasn't completed was the environmental document.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else from the council?
I'm going to follow up, but if you want to
Yes.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I do have a couple of follow-up. The conditions that are being placed on those back lots facing, what I have a hard time with is that I don't remember any of these types of conditions being given to the Glen Loma development or to any of those surrounding that also have their back lots facing that direction. So what makes it different that you feel that it's necessary to put this deed restriction thing on here?
So, from my understanding, Glen Loma went through a very extensive process as a specific plan and had a number of concessions and trade-offs, and there was lots of negotiation that resulted in the city getting a number of amenities, including trails and parks and open space. So it's, in my view, fairly different from this project, which is a smaller infill development, which needs to be evaluated on its own merits. So, in that instance, we have to look at this project as it relates to the Uvas Creek master plan. That master plan called for one of two things: a frontage road or a landscape buffer between the creek and the development. So that's the objective we were trying to achieve. The conditions that we have proposed based on the recommendation of the commission to allow backing up to the Uvas Creek open space basically recognizes that the area behind lots 9 through 14 are basically inaccessible by this common retaining wall supporting those lots. So that provides the buffer and transition between the open space and development, in our view. That adheres to and promotes the intent of the Uvas Creek master plan, and that's why we said that this is fine. You'll leave this in more of a natural open space private preserve, make sure there's common maintenance of it and that the vegetation is maintained, the trees are maintained, and we'll have that buffer that was called for by the Uvas Creek Preserve, and you get to maintain them as private lots. That was the compromise we felt we were
Right,
reaching.
but by putting that retaining wall in there, I just don't understand, because it seems to me like you're doing a taking of the land. What is the requirement for open space on this? This is a small 8-acre thing, you know. It's not like our big specific plans that we've gone through and have all this master planning. And it just seems to me that by you putting that retaining wall there, and I understand you've explained why you feel the need for it, but then why put a restriction on the land behind it? Or from what I remember, or what I was told, I did walk the land, and I agree with Councilmember Bracco. It's just a lot of brush. But it seems that people aren't going to be able to let their dogs go out there. There's like this restriction, an additional restriction put on that land. And I don't understand. You have to understand, when you hear all of that we're hearing and the position we're in, it surely seems that it's a punitive condition. And there's no proof to say that, but it surely seems like that.
Well, and to try to put your mind at ease on that, we're specifically relying on the page 48 of the Uvas Creek Master Plan. That's what we're looking to. That's our guiding document. It's the city's document. So it's not meant to be punitive. It's meant to implement what we see as the important planning document. This area is not accessible with these retaining walls. So if it's going to be utilized, it can't be developed because you can't drain to the creek.
Develop it, right.
So it's fine to utilize it, but then they should provide some access to it. And personally, I think that if the council has a difference of opinion with this document, how we've interpreted it, we're certainly open to amending that condition. It's not meant to. It's meant to implement the Uvas Creek Master Plan document in a way that we felt made sense, given the limited access to this part of the lot. Since it can't be developed, it still won't be developed. It needs to be maintained. That's fine. If we want to allow any kind of landscaping in use there for passive recreation, that's fine. But then it should have some access there, and that does change the grading plan, and that hasn't been analyzed. So therein lies some of the concerns.
So when I was walking back there, I went all the way to the trail. There's a path there. I mean, whether or not you want to call it an official trail, there's definitely a worn-out, walkable path that people, and it's wide enough to put your bicycle as well. So you have people coming from wherever that starts, whether it starts from the levee or Christmas Hill Park or wherever it starts from, and people can come from the back. So that's why it doesn't make sense to me. You're saying that, well, there's a path there, and people can actually come up to the people's retaining walls from the back, but the people who own it can't let their dog go down there and go potty or something. I mean,
yeah.
It's not making sense to
I
me.
understand. The issue we have is that since October last year, this is raised as an issue, and we've been asking the applicant to come up with some other viable solution, and as of yet, there hasn't been a proposal to access this or address this issue, so we had to come up with a solution, and this was the best solution we could come up with. We certainly are open to modifying this to allow this to be accessed to be private yard area. There's really no issue with that. It was just a matter of trying to respect that boundary interface between the creek and private development. So if we want to more favor the property rights and use this area, I just would recommend we have a condition that requires them to show us some kind of access so that owners can maintain.
I'm just thinking that, honestly, once these lots are sold and people buy them, once you buy your house, you think your backyard's your backyard, and you're going to do whatever you want,
That's exact-
regardless to what the city says.
That is exactly right.
I don't know what we're trying to prevent here by putting this condition on. That's all. I don't understand it.
Fair enough.
So what we're trying to prevent is the property owner feeling that they can build, they can modify the grading in that back area, which they cannot do, and it becomes a code enforcement issue. Rancho Hills, we have those properties that run up the hill. That's supposed to be additional lot space, interface. You're not supposed to be building up there. Our code enforcement has to go up there, tell them to take down their tree houses and their, whatever other structures or trails or whatever they put in. Same thing, we have a very large lot up on the hill of Rancho Hills, 30-some acres. And the majority of that is just open space easement. And we've had a lot of back and forth with people wanting to do a lot more on that. They wanted to put in horse stables. They wanted to put in dirt tracks. Those are things. So what we're trying to prevent is down the road code enforcement issues that we're going to have to deal with. So as Craig said, there could be other solutions, but we haven't seen a solution that would address those issues that we're concerned about.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. What did you, this has just gone on and on and on. Did you provide any alternative solutions other than taking away that land? Did you have any ideas? Because clearly they're not coming back with something, and I'm not going to sit up here and try to redesign this, but it seems to me that it's more punitive than what it should be.
No, we didn't have other solutions because we didn't have the opportunity to have that dialogue, even though it was presented as an issue about a year ago from this date. We've tried to have dialogues. They just, for one reason or another, weren't successful. So we had to bring this to you in this fashion. We didn't want to bring this as an unresolved issue, but that's where we're at today. We feel that there's enough information to come up with a solution, and if the council didn't agree with this condition, we felt it's very appropriate to modify it, strike it, or eliminate it, but require that there be access to those properties. And that's easy to implement, either a gate through the back. What he had proposed was stairs down the retaining wall. Again, that hasn't been analyzed. Perhaps it's feasible, but we need to be very clear on the limitations of the use of this area.
Right, I understand. What condition is that? There's too many conditions.
Okay, anybody else on the council? Okay, staff, so early on in the staff report, you talk about, see if I could find it. I thought it was 3 lots in particular that had some security issues or safety and security issues.
That issue was raised with lots 9 through 14. That was an issue that was raised by Parks and Police regarding, and by planning with regard to these lots backing onto Uvas Creek. That's more or less been resolved by the fencing and the retaining walls.
Okay, so their concerns go away as long as that retaining wall goes up.
Yes, in terms of access and security of these lots. There's still a concern with this area to the left here. There's kind of a hidden area. There's a swale that comes out here where this trail goes up. So there's kind of an area that's hidden that might become a problem with homeless encampments, but it is what it is. I mean, if there's, these people will still be able to see on there. There's not a whole, it eliminates the privacy. They can see out there, so there'll be some private eyes on the open space. So it does the job in a different way. But more or less, yeah, that concern's been relieved by the retaining wall and fence.
Okay. Yes.
With talking about the retaining wall, do you know what the applicant meant by foundations acting as retaining walls?
I believe he's talking about eliminating the wall and stepping the houses down into this area. Unfortunately, no, well, then perhaps he could explain it. No, I don't know what he means by that.
Okay, and has it been something that you've considered?
It's nothing that's been presented, so
it's not
no.
been. It was just presented tonight.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, back to council. All right. What is the will of the council? Yes.
Okay, at a minimum, I think conditions 5 and 6 need to change, as discussed earlier, that number 5 needs to refer to the expungement so that that's clear when that happens, and that number 6 needs to refer to the stage 3 drought declared by the state in order for permits not to be issued.
So
Those would be my two.
So with regards to, clearly I'm saying that the expungement occurs after the I think it was tentative map.
Whenever it is, but make sure it's clear that when the city is signed off on the houses, this is no longer present.
Right. Okay. And then 6 was the stage 3.
Yeah, so that it's
And staff, you guys got those notes on that? Okay. And Councilmember Bracco, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was going to make a motion.
Okay.
So my motion would be to approve it as it went to the Planning Commission. It had conditions. They just added more.
Yeah.
Well, I think what was added, it looked to me, I don't know, because I mentioned conditions 37 to 47 under the section planning special conditions, planning department special conditions. I think those were the added ones, but I don't know.
So without the special conditions.
Item number 37?
There's like,
yeah, it starts at 37 and goes all the way down.
added like 10.
46.
Are you going, I understand, but does the motion include the 5 and 6 changes that I did, or not?
No, the 5 and 6.
Yeah.
No, yeah, you can add that to it.
Okay, so let's get some clarification, Craig. I think Councilmember Blankley asked this question earlier, and I thought everybody was clear on the answer. When this item went to the Planning Commission, were any conditions provided to the Planning Commission?
My understanding, again, I wasn't here, my understanding is no, they were not. The project was presented for denial. I believe the draft environmental was presented, which would have had draft mitigation measures. Those would have been items 47 through 58 or so, or 56. So those may have been presented, but there were no project-specific.
Do we have a staff person who was here at the Planning Commission?
I'll defer to Christie on that.
So Patricia Beston just gave me the staff report from the Planning Commission, and there were no conditions. There was vicinity map, reduced project plans, draft, administrative draft initial study, small project exemption, and a recommended resolution, which was for denial.
Christy, who was the staff person at the Planning Commission?
Brad Evanson.
Okay, and he's not here tonight. Oh,
No.
That's right. Okay. Okay. Okay, so say your answer again then, Christy?
There were no conditions provided to the Planning Commission.
Okay, no conditions. Now, what about the mitigation items, number 47 through 50, whatever? Were those included or not?
No.
Okay, so, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'll clarify my motion. To leave in 1 through 36, which are the standard conditions, and to modify 5 and 6 as per Councilmember Blankley. And 11A?
Eliminate.
And then, yeah, and eliminate 37 through 47. of the special conditions.
And that amendment is acceptable to me as the seconder.
So for clarification, that would leave in the later conditions as well, after 46?
The later ones, yes, the 37 to 47.
The ones after 47. 47 and
no,
later.
take them out.
Take them all out.
Those are, there are environmental conditions there too, through the negative deck.
Yeah, leave the standard ones that are with every project, leave those in.
Okay, council, so, I was prepared to support this project because as one of the I think it was Tom, had talked about that, that this property was or is a resource for the church. And, you know, I've always said that, you know, one of my goals is, you know, I love this community. I want a community that we could live, play, and work. And I think as part of that, we also want a community that we could worship in. And I think this particular project goes a long ways to achieving those goals. However, if we start removing these conditions, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to support it because it does not meet the goals of not just the general plan, but the Uvas Creek Preserve Plan. And what we're removing here are some things that, frankly, are pretty simple processing fees, that the outstanding fees need to be paid. Why would we remove that? The motion includes removing item 47, which talks about demonstrating that the off-road equipment on site for the construction of the project would you know, have some sort of, I don't want to go into too many details here, but we're removing that item as well. You know, we do a lot of talking about safe route to schools, but then we're trying to remove one of the items that would clearly make safe routes to schools possible. Council, I would strongly urge the council to really think about this and really figure out how we could get to a win-win so that we could support this project, move it off the plate, and as I said, have this be a win-win for both the city and New Hope Church.
Mayor?
And yes, sir.
That would be nice, but I believe because of staff's actions is the reason this is in our laps now. I look at this and it looks like stuff is punitive. That a lot of these conditions got thrown on there because they're upset with this applicant. And
Well,
3
Councilmember
years,
Brock,
I don't believe any of these projects should take 3 years. And this is one of many projects that they've done in the past. And it seems like all they do is hit roadblocks. And I think we need to do something. I think we have a problem here. And I think sooner or later, we're going to get an applicant that's going to sue us over this stuff.
Okay. All right. It's up to the rest of the council. What do you guys? We have a motion on the floor to remove, and correct me if I'm wrong here, to remove items 37 through 47.
That would be through 46, wouldn't it be?
46, yeah.
He had said 47, so that's,
I think that was a confusion.
well, that's why I was pointing out 47. So it's items 37 through 46, correct?
Yes.
And then modifying, which I agree with, items 5, was it 5 and 6? 5 and 6. 5 and 6 to include the expungement for 5 and stages for stage 3 for item 6.
Can I ask a clarifying question
Yes.
to the maker? So there are a lot of standard, what we refer to as standard planning division environmental conditions. They go all the way to, conditions 60, 61, 62. And some of these things are the engineering division conditions. Those are all.
We didn't remove those.
That's what I wanted to clarify. Are you removing those conditions? Okay. So you're not removing the engineering division conditions? 57. Okay. Okay. Got it.
Is it too late to ask which of those conditions, 37 through 46, the applicant takes serious objection to? Because I personally would like to see some of those stay, but I understand that this should never have been like it is.
But and I totally agree with you because, forget for a moment the process that got to this point. It's here now, and what we're trying to do is
let it move forward.
We're trying to get it forward
Yes.
to a point that we could all at least walk away grumbling about, but feeling like, hey, we managed to get something approved that is going to look nice and protect the city.
Right, so I would like to know if leaving the public access easement is something that the applicant can live with or not.
Is that 37?
That's 43.
I think at this point, if
It's in the category that is being proposed.
If the motion here is remove 37 through 46,
Okay.
the applicant is just going to
Okay,
say,
so I'm
yeah.
going to have to not support the way the motion is presented.
Mr. Mayor, I had a question.
Yes.
I also share some of the thoughts now that Councilmember Blankley is bringing up regarding hearing from the applicant one more time. Is that still available to us as an option?
Whatever you guys want.
I would certainly ask.
Thank you for running the meeting, council member.
I want to go through the mayor first, but Mr. Applicant, so there are a couple of conditions here that we've talked about in particular. One is with regard to the easement, and one is with regard to outstanding fees. I don't. The easement is number 43. I don't have the number on the outstanding fees.
That's 46.
45 on my list.
45. Thank you.
Is that the number? I'm sorry.
46.
45 is the retaining wall design.
Okay, on mine, it's processing fees is 45. So the issue I have with the processing fees, we don't know what they are. And so I've asked them repeatedly, give me the total, if it's a reasonable number, but I shouldn't be expected to pay for every hour that they can spend to try to defeat me. And that's going to be a big number. And just their outside contracts alone are, for outside contracting planners, are excessive. So I will leave it, I'll work with Christy and Gabe, and we can work that out. And same thing with some of these other conditions. I don't need all of them removed. It's considering the audience that you have here and the young children, we could either put this on the end of tonight's agenda, or I'll work in good faith with them to go through.
I'm sorry, would you say we put it on what agenda?
You can put on the end, in other words, you could postpone this, hear the rest of your agenda. And
Oh, I see.
Later tonight, we can go through the conditions one by one. But it's rather time consuming, and it is confusing. I'm confused. But I do want the neg deck adopted without the two new conditions. And then if you can do.
Without what conditions?
What are the two new conditions on the neg deck?
I'd have to pull it out. They basically put a new condition, and this is after it was circulated. They put a new condition identifying potential wetlands that weren't in the evidence of the body of the report, and it exposes me to higher HCP fees, again, a punitive condition. And so I'd like that document adopted as it was circulated, and that clarifies that. The rest of the conditions we're fine with. 99% of these conditions we're fine with. If we hadn't received them so late, September 29th, I could have worked this out with staff.
So Mr. Sooner, just to be clear, you're willing to work with staff regarding the outstanding fees, assuming you can, come to a number, so it's known to all parties, and then also by your statement as well, I'm inferring that you'd be okay with leaving the condition regarding a public easement. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'll work with staff on all the conditions that are being removed tonight. I'll work with them and.
Wait, what do you mean that are being removed? There's a proposal to remove.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I just want to make,
All right, semantics, but I agree.
well-
So, I'm just,
okay,
council hasn't taken an action yet.
right.
So I'm saying that if they were to adopt it without those conditions, then I'll meet with Christy and Craig next week, potentially Gabe, and we'll go through the conditions. And some of those we might be able to just modify in-house, and we'll report back to council. I'm not trying to ram this down anybody's throat, but I did get these on September 29th.
Yeah.
And that's really late in the process. So after the planning commission approved the project, that would have been the time for us to get these. And we have months to resolve it. But I appreciate all the dialogue, and we do need to find a solution for this, because it's a hostile planning environment, and it's not just me. And we process this under an R.J. Dyer letterhead with John Taft as a project manager, specifically to remove my personality from the argument, so they couldn't say I'm abrasive, I'm abusive, whatever. That's just not,
James, if it were proposed to be approved with all the conditions, with the changes to 5 and 6, how would you feel about that?
Well, the other one that really bothers me is the deed restrictions on lots 1 and 2. Because if I pull up that tree map, all those black trees are too small. They're undersized. So I have to remove those to get rid of the canopy to allow the larger trees to have a
Okay,
canopy.
what condition is deed restrictions on just lots 1 and 2?
Is that 40? 39?
Is that the building envelopes on 1 and 2?
Yeah,
Is that what you
exactly.
mean? That would be
39 and
39.
39.
Correct. And so the idea there is that if one of my homeowners says, hey, I've always dreamed of having a long driveway, then I have the ability to extend that driveway an extra 15 feet to meet that need. And these building envelopes restrict me to the point where I'm not sure they're even buildable. And again, late condition.
Right.
So James, I'm sorry,
No.
Councilmember?
I was just going to say then, if 39 were the one removed, could we then move forward? I mean, we have a motion on the table. It might move forward like that. But if it didn't, would it move forward just taking out 39 and changing 5 and 6?
And then the processing fees need to be resolved.
So
And specifying the processing fees? Okay. go ahead.
I truly hate making decisions up here at the dais, because we end up, more often than not, bad decisions. What we've heard James say is that he's willing to work with city staff potentially this week and next week to resolve some of these conflicts. I thought I heard him say that.
Yeah, that's what I said, but
Yeah. Well, what I heard him, no, I thought I heard him say that you were willing to meet with staff next week or this week to talk
correct,
to.
but it has to be a good faith negotiation.
Oh, I understand.
Mr. Mayor.
Let me just throw this out there, see what the council thinks. What if we postpone this item to November 5th and bring it back after they've had an opportunity to hammer out some of these things, so that at least then we'll get a clean version of what they can live with and potentially what are still obstacles in the negotiations. So we're not denying a project. We're not saying yes to it. We're just going to bring it back after they've had an opportunity to talk and hammer out some of these things. Meanwhile, conditions 5 and 6 could get cleaned up, and we figure out what we want to do. So what's the will of the council?
Well, I also have an issue with condition 40. And that's what I was referring to as the open space, not being able to let your dog go down there and all that. So, I mean, I don't know if he does, but I do as a future, I'm not a future homeowner, but I'm just saying I'm thinking of what the future homeowners might be wanting to do with their backyard.
So I think some of those things could be discussed, and at the end of the day, maybe, staff and James come back and say, okay, these items here we came to agreement with, these items here we partially agree, and these items here, it's an obstacle, we don't agree. And then at least the council will be able to go forward. You already have 2 council members who are saying that the way the motion stands now, we can't support it. And so I'm trying to look for a way for all of us to be able to support this thing. I think there's a will to support it. We all want that. I'm just trying to get some thoughts.
Mr. Mayor, as the seconder of the motion, I would be okay with us taking that time to see if they can reach an agreement and
Thank you.
presenting that.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear from Gabe. So we've had several negotiations that failed, and staff's position has been that these are conditions to be imposed, not to be negotiated. And that's how we wound up here. So I just want to make it clear that we're going to have a good faith negotiation that's not intent on, stopping the project.
No, we're just stopping the project, and one way or the other, this thing will come back to the council on November 5th. Okay, Gabe, you want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I take direction from you, council. So what I'm hearing from you and understanding is to go back and negotiate on these outstanding issues. Condition 36 to 46 in good faith, and I think 37. I've negotiated with Mr. Sooner in the past on other projects, and I think cooler heads can prevail. When we've sat down, we've talked through issues whereby the city and the developer are able to reach an agreement, and so I think that's what I'm hearing from you, and so that's my direction.
Okay.
Council? Well, the council, everybody cool with that?
So procedurally, the record should reflect then that Councilman Bracco's motion with the concurrence of the seconder has been withdrawn, correct?
Has been withdrawn, and Andy or Shauna, I have opened and closed the public hearing. Would it be appropriate at the next meeting to open the public hearing again, or?
That's within the will of the council. You can certainly reopen the public hearing.
Good enough. So we'll do that then at that meeting as
And
well.
I think you'll want to do that, I think.
So do we need to make a motion to continue to November
Yes.
5th?
Yes,
I'll move to continue to November 5th.
So there's a motion to move this item to November 5th. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second to continue this item. All those in favor of the motion to continue to November 5th, I think it is, please vote.
Just yes.
Well, just all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Oh, my God.
Okay, next item up is the